Chapter 9. March Madness. After we managed to evacuate the dead and wounded, thank God for that, things still weren't looking good. The landing zone at the top of Neville was being hammered by sporadic enemy mortar fire, which made it downright suicidal for helicopters to attempt delivering supplies. So there I was, suddenly relieved of my mission to support Hotel Company, and the order came down for me to haul it back to Golf Company on Firebase Kates. But wait. Because of that relentless mortar threat, I was shoved into a patrol tasked with descending the steep, treacherous mountain finger extending off Neville. The plan? Clear a temporary landing area away from the top of that godforsaken hill so we could get supplies choppered in without getting blown to bits. Let me tell you, that descent was a nightmare. The ground was loose, and there were no solid footholds to be found. Everyone was still rattled, the ghost of the enemy sapper attack hanging over us like a dark cloud. About 400 yards down, we stumbled upon a plateau that looked big enough to clear a temporary landing zone. We whipped out our machetes and shovels, fighting against the sparse vegetation like it was a battle of its own. When the CH-46 finally landed, we scrambled to unload the desperately needed supplies for the guys on the firebase. I clambered aboard the helicopter and couldn't help but watch through the porthole as the Marines from Hotel Company painstakingly started their ascent back up the steep slope of the mountain, weighed down by the very supplies we had just fought to bring in. Relief washed over me. I was rejoining Golf Company. Thank God I wouldn't have to go back to that hellhole called Fire Support Base Neville. Next to me on the helicopter ride were a bunch of fresh-faced replacements, wide-eyed and looking utterly bewildered about what awaited them. One of them was PFC, David Patterson from Wisconsin, blissfully unaware that his initiation into this madness would be a hell equal, if not tougher, than what I had experienced. We sat in a heavy silence, both lost in our own thoughts, as the CH-46 Sea Knight helicopter lifted off, carrying us into an uncertain future that I could only hope wouldn't be as brutal as what I had already seen. Arriving at LZ Kates felt like stepping into a new chapter of an unpredictable book. As I made my way through the bustling firebase, I was met by Sergeant Greep, a figure who always radiated an intensity that made it clear he meant business. It wasn't exactly a hello wagoner, glad to have you back aboard. Without wasting a moment, he introduced me to the new 1st Platoon Commander, 2nd Lieutenant John Strange. Lieutenant Strange stood tall and lanky, a young officer in his early 20s who exuded an air of confidence that was both reassuring and commanding. Our handshake was firm, a silent agreement that we'd be facing the trials ahead together. In the field, formalities like saluting were cast aside, and his quick, friendly greeting hinted at the camaraderie that was essential in the bush. However, I couldn't ignore the underlying sense that navigating Sergeant Greep's expectations would be a challenge of its own. Stepping back into the 1st Platoon felt like a roller coaster ride of emotions. On one hand, the warmth of camaraderie wrapped around me like a familiar blanket, offering a sense of belonging that was oh so comforting. Yet, just beneath that surface, a nagging disappointment clawed at my heart. The reality hit hard. The brave Marines who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me during the intense last 2 months were gone. Their absence was a stark reminder of the brutal truths we faced on the battlefield, leaving behind an unmistakable void that echoed in the present. As I scanned the firebase, many familiar faces greeted me. Some were the very men who had arrived in Vietnam around the same time I did, sharing in the uncertainty and fear that came with our deployment. A wave of relief washed over me as I watched these young Marines, many near my age, engaging in light-hearted banter and laughter. Their camaraderie was obvious, a vibrant mix of veterans and fresh recruits, forging bonds that would carry them through the challenges ahead. In that moment, amidst the laughter and shared stories, I felt a flicker of hope. When I first shook hands with Corporal Dale Duke, my new squad leader, a powerful surge of relief and optimism ran through me. In that initial moment, his firm grasp and warm smile told me I wasn't stepping into this daunting challenge alone. There was an unmistakable depth in his eyes, a blend of battle-hardened wisdom and an upbeat, almost mischievous spark that instantly made me confident he had my back as we navigated the unpredictable challenges of war. Standing beside him was Gary Weiss, one of his squad members. The two men were having a playful banter between them that immediately eased my tension. PFC Weiss, a lean, determined Marine hailing from Kentucky, was a gem. From the moment I met him, his unflappable nature and ability to relate with everyone was unmistakable. Gary quickly became much more than a fellow Marine. He was a steadfast friend. Dale, seasoned by months of combat duty and the relentless trials of the jungle, brought a unique blend of gravitas and youthful playfulness to his squad. His reputation was well earned, a leader who had already faced the crucible of battle, yet maintained a light-hearted charm that could brighten even the darkest of days. From the very beginning, every conversation with Dale was like sitting down for a master class of both comedy and resilience. With each word, his humor and experience wove together to create an atmosphere that was as inviting as it was instructive, reassuring me that, despite the uncertainty ahead, I was in the hands of a leader whose heart and humor could make even the toughest of days endurable. I still remember our first conversation like it was yesterday. As we shared stories, I casually mentioned that I was from Quincy, Illinois, a seemingly ordinary detail on a humid afternoon, but the moment Dale heard the name, his eyes sparkled with excitement. "No way!" he exclaimed. "You've got to meet Bill Juneau. He's from Rockford, Illinois, and you know, I'm from Burlington, Iowa." In that instant, I realized destiny had its peculiar sense of humor, weaving us together from the vast Midwestern tapestry. Burlington, Iowa was only an hour drive from Quincy and Rockford, closer to Chicago, was a well-known city in the land of Lincoln. Before I had a moment to process anything, I found myself being introduced to Juneau, a man who would soon be another anchor amidst the storm of war. Like Dale, Bill was destined to become more than just a fellow Marine. He would become a mentor, a friend, and a pillar of support during the relentless challenges we faced. Both men carried with them the resilient spirit of the Midwest, a blend of humor, unwavering loyalty, and a raw authenticity that made them both approachable and inspirational. Juneau, a couple of years my senior, wore his life's experiences like a badge of honor. Steadfast and freshly married to his high school sweetheart before heading off to Vietnam, he brought with him an earnest readiness to form genuine connections. His character commanded respect the moment you met him, a quiet strength that radiated from every word and gesture. He and Corporal Duke had a clear friendship beyond the camaraderie of serving together. Dale, ever the playful tease, would often spark mischievous banter, and Bill would laugh along heartily, never losing his cool. Their easygoing rapport was a comforting reminder that even in the harshest environments, there was still room for genuine human connection. Little did I know at the time that these two Midwestern boys, with their unique blend of humor and mentorship, would become my guardians in one of the most chaotic periods of my life. Their stories, laughter, and mentorship became invaluable lessons in resilience, courage, and the power of brotherhood, lessons that would shape me long after the echoes of Vietnam faded away. But not every introduction was a cause for celebration, and my encounter with my fire team leader proved to be a stark reminder of that reality. As I stood there, the air thick with anticipation, I found myself face to face with Lance Corporal Miller, the very same asshole who had pulled a prank on me during my perimeter watch at Vandegrift Combat Base. Instead of the warm welcome I had hoped for, my heart sank, weighed down by an overwhelming sense of trepidation. Miller's presence was like a cold gust of wind on an otherwise sunny day, unwelcome and jarring. The contrast couldn't have been more pronounced. Just moments ago, I had experienced the genuine warmth and guidance of Dale Duke, whose friendly mentorship had made me feel like I belonged in this chaotic world. But now, standing before Miller, I felt the atmosphere shift. His surly demeanor and piercing gaze sent a clear message. This was not a place for complacency or becoming his friend. As I grappled with this jarring contrast, it struck me like a sudden flash. The road ahead promised to be anything but certain. I had stepped into a battleground where connections could be made or broken in the blink of an eye, and the stakes loomed larger than I had ever anticipated. Casting a look of disdain at Miller, I steeled myself for the trials that lay ahead, aware that this journey would demand not only resilience, but also a knack for maneuvering through the tangled relationship of two Marines who couldn't stand the sight of each other. The following morning broke with the promise of hard work, a sunrise that found us shoulder deep in sandbags. It was during these early hours that I met TJ, or Thomas J. Ingalls, though everyone simply called him TJ. A robust, mustachioed lumberjack hailing from Millinocket, Maine, TJ quickly established himself as a man of few words but incredible resolve. His silent strength and commanding presence made him the natural leader of our ragtag group, his influence growing with every new challenge we faced. By TJ's side stood Private First Class Joe Barbagallo, a true son of Philadelphia, whose narrative shone as brilliantly as his character. Joe, far from being just another Marine, embodied a unique blend of rugged physicality and keen intellect. His years at college had only polished his raw brilliance, and his life experience set him apart even among veterans. Joe's leadership inspired us all. He commanded not by issuing endless orders, but by taking bold, fearless action, instilling in us the belief that no obstacle was too daunting if faced with courage. Their bravery lit our collective path, reminding us daily that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to triumph over it. With every task, every challenge presented by that hostile landscape, Joe and TJ transformed barriers into chances for personal growth and collective unity. In the midst of our exertions, Corporal Duke, ever the mischief maker, sidled up to Joe and me with a twinkle in his eye. In a low, conspiratorial whisper, he shared a prank that would soon send TJ into a state of utter turmoil. With dramatic flair, Duke challenged TJ to a bet. He claimed he had money on the skinny new kid, that's me, hauling more sandbags to the far end of the firebase than TJ himself could. TJ's response was immediate. His deep, guttural growl reverberated across the air as he snapped, "You're on, Duke. You've got to be nuts." With a burst of determination, and perhaps a dash of pride, TJ hoisted 2 sandbags in his arms and effortlessly marched across the hillside, his rugged figure etched against the morning light as he delivered his load to the designated bunker. Meanwhile, the sly duo of Corporal Duke and Joe got to work. They swiftly filled 3 more sandbags, but with much less sand in each, a crafty maneuver designed for the prank. In a quick, almost imperceptible exchange, they passed the lighter sacks to me, who then trudged over the hill. The tension was electric as TJ reappeared, stern brow furrowed and lips curling into a snarl upon inspecting the weight in my arms. The prank escalated with each trip. My load, though deceptively light, was the perfect tool in our playful battle of wills. TJ's initial pride slowly dissolved into astonishment as he watched me steadily surpass his own efforts. Laughter soon broke out among us as the burly lumberjack realized he'd been brilliantly duped. Corporal Duke couldn't help but explain the harmless trick, leaving TJ with a conflicted expression, a mix of relief that the challenge was over and anger at everyone who plotted his unexpected defeat. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Even in the midst of war, camaraderie, and a good-natured prank can transform a day of labor into a memorable chapter of shared clowning and laughter. On the first day of March in 1969, my childhood hero, New York Yankees legend Mickey Mantle, announced his retirement due to persistent knee injury, and I was about to begin the worst month of my life. I felt a sudden, intense feeling of excitement as we received the news. A 4-day operation in the jungle awaited us, lurking ominously somewhere north of Vandergrift Combat Base. The weight of this announcement hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over everyone and igniting a whirlwind of anxiety in my mind. Preparing for another mission felt like gearing up for a storm. The anticipation was ominous, and an unsettling sense of unease sat like a stone in my stomach. As I meticulously sorted through my gear, Dale Duke, our steadfast squad leader, emerged like a lighthouse in the fog. With his calm demeanor and wealth of experience, he guided me through the preparations, ensuring that I was ready for whatever lay ahead. "Don't forget to pack enough food rations. Take at least 9 meals," he urged, his voice steady and reassuring. Dale's insistence on bringing along 5 to 6 full canteens of water resonated deeply with me. It was a lesson hard-earned from my first patrol, where the specter of dehydration loomed large, and I had learned the hard way about the perils of skimping on supplies. I nodded in agreement, though a nagging worry lingered at the back of my mind. What if we found ourselves in a situation where our water supply dwindled too quickly again? With each item I packed, from the sea rations to the essential gear, I felt the gravity of our task solidifying. As I glanced at my fellow squad members, each lost in their thoughts yet united in purpose, I felt a flicker of determination ignite within me. We were in this together, and come what may, we would face it together. Lance Corporal Miller summoned Rogelio Morales, a spirited M60 machine gunner assigned to our squad. Morales' presence was always a blend of and humor and intensity. The savvy Mexican-American Marine hailed from the gang-infested streets of San Antonio, Texas, and had a spark in his eye that masked the tension simmering just below the surface. Almost grinning in the face of danger, he bore an uncanny resemblance to Zorro from the Disney movies. His confidence and bravado spiked with a sense of humor, yet it was evident a deeper concern lurked beneath his jovial exterior. As Morales stepped forward, he began to demonstrate how to wrap 2 bandoliers of machine gun ammo around my chest, a technique reminiscent of the legendary Pancho Villa. His hands moved with a practiced ease, but the seriousness of his tone cut through the moment. "Listen up," he said, his voice steady. "Keeping this ammunition dry and clean from mud is critical. You make sure we get these bandoliers when the heat is on in a firefight." In that instant, I felt the bond of our team merging with the gravity of our mission. The laughter and playful teasing we exchanged briefly dispelled by the tension that lingered, yet as Morales wrapped up his demonstration, I realized we were teetering on the edge of a challenge that no one was eager to face. Lance Corporal Miller made a decision to assign me, alongside himself, Joe Barbagallo, and Gary Weiss, the critical task of taking turns walking point on our upcoming patrol. This assignment carries significant weight, as it entails leading the patrol while remaining hyper-aware of potential enemy ambushes, booby traps, mines, and various other threats that could jeopardize our mission and our safety. As I stood there processing this responsibility, a wave of unease washed over me. I couldn't shake my worries about whether my training had adequately prepared me for such a pivotal role. Walking point is not just a job, it's a position fraught with danger and requires a keen sense of awareness and quick reflexes. I voiced my concerns, hoping to gain some reassurance. Thankfully, my fellow squad member, Gary Weiss, quickly stepped in to alleviate my fears. Gary assured me that he would be there to provide all the necessary guidance and instruction I would need to navigate this daunting task. However, despite this reassurance, A lingering sense of apprehension remained as I pondered the weight of the responsibility that lay ahead of me. The sun cast its golden rays over the reddish dirt landscape at Firebase Cates as our platoon clambered aboard a CH-46 helicopter, its whirring blades creating a foreboding turbulence of wind. With almost half our platoon snugly stowed inside, two more helicopters hovered in anticipation, ready to scoop up the remaining Marines. As we soared northward, the terrain below shifted rapidly as we approached the mesa that cradled Firebase Neville, a place etched in my memory for all the wrong reasons. Just days prior, I had helped clear this very landing zone, and now the thought of returning made me shiver. The mission ahead was clear yet daunting. Golf Company's 1st Platoon was tasked with patrolling the ridgelines on the west side of Neville, our primary objective being to root out any lingering enemy threats. Our focus was sharpened on the elusive NVA mortar teams that had been a persistent thorn in our side, launching harassing fire upon the firebase. We were determined to put an end to their menace, to ensure that the Marines on Neville could operate without the constant specter of danger hanging overhead. Meanwhile, 2nd Platoon would mirror our efforts on the eastern side of the mountain, while 3rd Platoon prepared to relieve Hotel Company to defend Neville. The air was thick with tension and anticipation as we braced ourselves for the patrol ahead, knowing full well that the challenges we faced would test not only our skills, but also our resolve. After setting down and unloading, we spent a grueling day of traversing the ridgelines, with Lieutenant Strange leading from the middle of the patrol. We scoured the entire area, trudging within the dense jungle, our heavy packs weighing us down as we maneuvered through the unforgiving terrain. The oppressive heat and humidity made every step feel like a battle in itself. As the hours passed, some of us began to fall behind, our exhaustion evident in our slow, labored movements. Sergeant Greep, a hardened veteran of the Korean War, had little patience for weakness. He barked orders and pushed us to keep moving, resorting to physical force when necessary. The sun beat down on us mercilessly, and the weight of our packs felt like it was crushing us with every step. My brain screamed at me in agony, but I forced myself to put one foot in front of the other, determined to keep moving despite my pain and exhaustion. I focused on the rhythmic sound of my breathing and the steady thud of my boots against the ground, willing myself to block out the pain and fatigue. That afternoon we encountered several NVA soldiers on an adjacent ridge. The atmosphere crackled with tension as we exchanged fire with the enemy. The sharp staccato sounds of M16 rifles rang out like thunder through the trees, sending adrenaline coursing through our veins. It was a heart-pounding moment, one that felt like a scene straight out of an action movie. Then, in the blink of an eye, those enemy soldiers vanished into the dense underbrush, leaving us on edge, knowing this clash was far from over. The thrill of the chase ignited within us, but were we chasing them or they chasing us? We could practically feel the weight of their eyes on our backs, watching our every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. In that instant, we transitioned from hunters to the hunted, and the stakes had never been higher. Every sound, every rustle in the bushes heightened our senses. We were on high alert, hearts racing, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. This was no ordinary day. This was a fight for survival, and we were in it together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, an eerie chill crept into the air, wrapping around us like a suffocating shroud. We hastily dug foxholes for our defensive perimeter, but the oppressive darkness of the jungle loomed like a living entity, watching and waiting. The cacophony of unfamiliar night sounds echoed through the trees, distant tree limbs falling, rustling leaves, and the unnerving calls of unseen creatures, each one sending a chill down our spines. It felt as if the very jungle was alive, breathing and hungry for something or someone. On March 2nd, our patrolling continued, each of us teetering on the razor's edge of tension, ready for combat at a moment's notice. The The jungle enveloped us like a suffocating blanket, its oppressive heat and relentless humidity amplifying the gnawing unease that seeped into our bones. We were deep in enemy territory, what Corporal Duke ominously referred to as Injun country, and each step we took could very well plunge us into the jaws of a deadly ambush. Gary Weiss took the lead, walking point with a determined tenseness etched across his face. He moved slowly and cautiously, his eyes darting around like a hawk in search of prey, questioning every shadow, every noise that dared to disrupt the eerie silence. We fell in line, keeping a distance of 10 to 12 feet between us, a buffer zone designed to minimize the impact of any potential explosive devices that might lurk in the underbrush. Every now and then, Gary would beckon me forward, eager to share his findings, a footprint imprinted in the mud, discarded munitions or bits of military gear, each suspicious clue a potential trap waiting to ensnare the unwary. When the moment came for me to take point, a wave of terror washed over me. What if I missed something critical and it cost someone their life? But Gary, sensing my anxiety, reassured me with a promise. He would be right there, ready to lend a hand if anything seemed amiss. His confidence steadied my fraying nerves, and I steeled myself for the task ahead. As I scanned the trail beneath my feet for anything out of the ordinary, I shifted my gaze to the dense jungle flanking me on both sides, then up to the tree lines, ever vigilant for the glint of a sniper's rifle. Time stretched, each moment amplifying the tension, and the very air around me felt charged with an electric urgency. Then I spotted it. A footprint, unmistakably the shape of a sandal, a grim testament to NVA presence. With a grave nod, Gary confirmed my find, calling for our leaders to examine the evidence. Sergeant Greep and Lieutenant Strange quickly huddled, and after a brief discussion, it was decided that I should blaze a new trail, steering clear of the well-worn path for a while. Armed with my machete, I swung wildly at the dense vines, only to find them resilient, as if they were made of rubber, effortlessly bouncing back against my efforts. Each shrub and cluster of greenery seemed to swallow me whole, making progress feel painfully slow. Just when I thought I had carved a path, I stumbled straight into a massive spider web, the silk sticky and suffocating. An arachnid the size of a dinner plate clung to my face, its legs writhing in a surreal dance. With a frantic swipe, I brushed it away, shivering in pure terror. Joe Barbagallo took over walking point, and I barely had the energy to keep up, stumbling behind Gary like a zombie dragged along by the weight of utter exhaustion. My shins were smeared with dried blood, and I could only assume it was the result of those vile branches slapping against my legs as I pushed through the suffocating tangle of vines. When we finally got a moment's reprieve, I decided to relieve myself and was met with an utterly grotesque sight, a leech, that slimy, wretched creature, gorging itself on the tip of my penis. It was beyond revolting. So, with the precision of a surgeon, or perhaps more accurately, a panicked fool, I managed to make that repulsive parasite drop off with a hot match tip. Still rattled and mortified, I confided in Corporal Duke, who, instead of offering sympathy, suggested I drop my trousers and perform a leech check. Reluctantly, I complied, and to my utter horror, I discovered a couple more of those disgusting leeches feasting on my legs. Even worse, I found a few of them had gorged themselves to the point of bursting, their grotesque, bloated bodies oozing out the very blood that had stained my pants. The whole experience was enough to make my stomach churn. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I learned about jungle rot, a nightmarish infection where sores develop yellow pus beneath scabs. What a charming place this jungle was, teeming with all manner of horrors. I was beginning to think Vietnam was a living, breathing entity, intent on torturing us with its endless parade of grotesque hazards. That night, Under a canopy of starlit despair, I clutched my precious water ration like a lifeline. Each drop felt sacred as I carefully tended to the leech sores that marred my skin, reminders of the ghastly day that had taken its toll. With every sting of the antiseptic, a shiver ran through me, a stark reminder of nature's relentless cruelty. The fatigue hung heavy on my shoulders, pressing down like an unwelcome weight, while disgust twisted in my gut. The images of the day's horrors played on a loop in my mind, refusing to let me rest. March 3rd. As the first light of dawn broke, I found myself surrounded by an eerie silence, punctuated only by the crackling of my sea rations and the soothing gurgle of hot coffee filling my cup but emptying my last canteen. The warmth of the coffee contrasted sharply with the haunting chill that had wrapped around me throughout the long, restless night. There was a bittersweet irony in savoring these simple comforts amidst the backdrop of chaos. This was the last of my meager meal rations, yet my hope swelled that the 4-day operation was nearing its end. But even as I clung to that hope, the stark reality of our situation crashed over me like the cold mountain winds. Our daily patrols brought us closer and closer to engaging North Vietnamese Army, and now the low cloud cover essentially cloaked any resupply efforts. The CH-46 helicopters, our vital lifeline for supplies, were grounded. We were trapped by the foggy embrace of the rugged mountains. The day unfolded with the first unimaginable sorrow that would etch itself into our hearts forever. PFC Gerald Schultz, just a month into his brave deployment, was violently struck down, his vibrant spirit snuffed out long before help could arrive. At only 26 years old, this bright Marine from Beloit, Wisconsin, was heartbreakingly swept away, now a solemn name etched on a list of sacrifices as the relentless fighting continued to exact its heavy toll. The air was thick with mourning when, hours later, news of PFC Robert Goding's death pierced through our sorrow. He had been a rising star, a former high school basketball champion from Ashland, Maine, whose life had been full of promise, now cut short in an instant. Just 2 years earlier, he had led his team to victory, but here in this grim reality, it was clear that the true madness of March lay not in a sports tournament, but amid the relentless chaos of war. It served as a somber reminder that in this cruel theater of life, the randomness of death often claims the best among us, leaving behind a profound sense of sadness that echoes long after the shots have faded. 2 brave pilots flying UH-34 helicopters through the dense mountain fog risked their lives in hope of saving our dying comrades. Yet time was a cruel adversary, and death waits for no one. Before the last helicopter left with PFC, Goding's dead body, an intense sense of anxiety hung in the air, thick as the mist that cloaked the jungle around us. Just when it felt like despair might settle in for good, a single figure stepped out of the chopper portal, a young Marine sniper, his presence a beacon of hope in our murky gloom. His eyes, sharp and focused, held the promise of deliverance. With every breath he seemed to channel the spirit of those who had fought before him, embodying a fierce determination to combat the unseen enemies lurking in the treetops. The sniper wasn't just another Marine, he was our lifeline, a glimmer of hope that shone bright against the backdrop of fear and trepidation. As I made my way toward PFC Darrell Bauer, a rush of excitement surged through me, like riding the crest of a wave just before it breaks. There he stood, his dark brown hair framing a face alive with determination, and those keen, piercing eyes, ones that seemed to absorb every detail of the world around him. Our initial greetings quickly blossomed into a dynamic conversation, peeling back the layers of his character like the pages of a gripping novel, humble yet brimming with an eagerness to make his mark on the battlefield. With a proud grin, PFC Bauer whipped out a picture of him with his girlfriend, a snapshot that spoke volumes. She was undeniably pretty, yet the hint of sadness in her expression tugged at my heartstrings as they sat together at what appeared to be a wedding or high school dance. It struck me that here was a young man who had just returned home from training, his freshly shorn hair a testament to his transition into this new chapter of life. Our interaction was sprinkled with light-hearted moments, as he amused me with playful anecdotes from his childhood, proudly embracing the nickname Dino, inspired by Fred and Wilma Flintstone's beloved pet dinosaur. In his eyes, I didn't just see a fellow Marine. I saw a young man on the brink of conquering the world, full of dreams and aspirations. As our conversation flowed effortlessly, it became crystal clear that Dino was not merely gearing up for combat, he was preparing himself to become our protector, a critical role for the mission's success. His enthusiasm radiated like the sun, infusing the air with an intense energy as he spoke passionately about the responsibility that came with that position. With a sharpness of sight that belied his youth, he was ready to fiercely defend us. On March 6th, a C-130 cargo plane flew high overhead and parachuted 2 pallets of supplies to us. Finally, we had food and water. However, as we stood on the ridgeline cheering, we watched in dismay as one of the parachutes carrying a pallet of sea rations drifted off into the valley below. We knew that if the NVA reached it before us, they would take a large portion of our food. Many of us were starving and hadn't eaten for days. Lieutenant Strange sent a recovery team, but by the time they arrived to the pallet, it was ransacked by the NVA. The enemy ate well that day while we continued to starve. That night, Gary, Roland Radford, and I found ourselves engaged in the noble, or perhaps not so noble, task of digging yet another fighting hole, a cozy little nook for our nightly defensive stance. Armed with our trusty entrenching tools, we set to work, clearing away the dead foliage that cluttered our makeshift sanctuary. It was during this industrious endeavor that I stumbled upon a creature that could only be described as a horror film auditioning for a part, a centipede, a grotesque 8 inches of segmented terror, adorned with a thick red body and enough yellow legs to make any arachnophobe's skin crawl. As I unearthed this wriggling nightmare, it clearly wasn't in the mood for pleasantries. After a flurry of creepy crawler motion, it adopted an aggressive stance, and I soon learned that its bite, while not a death sentence, promised a jolt of pain that could make grown men weep. Alas, this particular species was as abundant in Vietnam as mosquitoes at a summer picnic. The thought of spending the night with such a sinister squatter in our trench was simply unacceptable. So, with a swift and decisive action worthy of a horror movie hero, I severed the vile thing in half and promptly disposed of it far from our living quarters. Now let me introduce you to Roland Radford, the unforgettable star of my squad. He shone brighter than the most dazzling constellation on a moonless night. Roland was a profoundly proud black man whose presence commanded respect. He exuded the cool, rhythmic slang of a beatnik, infused with the intellectual gravity of a seasoned scholar and the streetwise cleverness of someone who had danced with life and lived to tell the tale. Everyone enjoyed being around Roland Radford. As the moon rose and cast its silvery glow over our night position, 3 fellow black Marines dropped by to pay Roland a visit. In Vietnam, African-American servicemen had a camaraderie that was a deep brotherhood, thus referring to each other as the brothers. Among them was PFC Gregory Foster, a reserved 19-year-old from Queens, New York, who seemed more introspective than his counterpart, William Willie Brown, an exuberant jokester with a playful spirit that could light up the darkest night. The third member of this illustrious gathering was Lance Corporal Gene Clemencia, hailing from Washington, D.C. Their reunion was marked by a complex handshake that looked like a choreographed slapping of hands, fists, and fingers, colloquially known as the Dap handshake, which Roland later teased me about, claiming it was a brother's secret ritual not meant for white boys. The atmosphere quickly morphed into a friendly debate as the brothers launched into a spirited argument over which city boasted the toughest street gangs. Only Lance Corporal Brown refrained from joining the fray. A proud resident of Blytheville, Arkansas, he clearly had his own brand of unyielding toughness that rendered him the undisputed heavyweight champion of the group. Meanwhile, Gary and I remained largely silent, absorbing the lively banter like sponges, thoroughly entertained by the camaraderie and friendly ribbing. It was evident that William Henry Brown, a seasoned machine gunner, was a leader, earning the admiration of Foster, Clemencia, and Rowland. PFC Foster, who had arrived in Vietnam at the same time I did, obviously looked up to his gun team leader with a reverence that was almost profound. They were an unusual duo. Foster, a wiry 5'7" and 130 pounds, stood in stark contrast to the formidable Willie Brown, a solid 200 pounds of muscle. After the bragging rights subsided and the visitors returned to their machine gun position, everyone braced ourselves for the night ahead. We wired up our Claymore mine and debated who would take what watch, knowing full well that a full night's rest was a luxury we could scarcely afford. The sun might have set, but the night was just getting started, filled with the ever-present uncertainty of what lay ahead. On March 7th, we faced yet another exhausting day, navigating the treacherous slopes of the lush, tangled mountains. We scoured the entire area, trudging through the dense jungle foliage, our heavy packs weighing us down as we maneuvered through the unforgiving terrain. The oppressive heat and humidity made every step feel like a battle in itself. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its relentless rays onto the dense jungle below, the patrol continued its grueling march through the tangled underbrush. The humidity hung thick in the air, wrapping around us like a heavy blanket, enveloping everyone in sweat and fatigue. Among us was PFC, David Patterson, the new replacement who had joined the unit only days before. With each step up the rugged mountain trail, Patterson felt the oppressive heat sapping his strength. The mysterious jungle that once seemed enchanting now appeared suffocating, a reminder of the unforgiving conditions he was up against. As his comrades moved with determination, David's pace began to falter. The relentless humidity clung to his skin, and beads of sweat rolled down his brow, blurring his vision. Despite everyone around him, he couldn't shake the feeling of isolation creeping in. The jungle whispered its own stories, a cacophony of sounds that enveloped the patrol, yet Dave felt a disconnect, as if the vibrant life surrounding him was mocking his struggle. He tried to push through to match the energy of his fellow comrades, but the symptoms of heat exhaustion came creeping in like a thief in the night. The mountain loomed ahead, a majestic obstacle, but for Dave, each step up was a test of endurance, one that he feared he might not conquer. As PFC Patterson labored, he found himself at the very back of our column, a solitary figure struggling against the relentless march of his fellow Marines. It felt as though he had been hiking for an eternity, every step a painful reminder of his unpreparedness for the grueling trek ahead of him. Blisters bubbled on his feet, each one a testament to his determination to press on. Yet, as exhaustion loomed larger with each passing moment, he yearned for nothing more than to collapse and seek refuge in the comforting embrace of rest shade. But in the unforgiving world of military survival, surrendering to fatigue was not an option. The patrol had to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. It was always critical that we made our checkpoints before nightfall. Word rippled through our ranks that one of the new men was struggling to keep pace. Lieutenant, strange, ever vigilant, sent Sergeant Greep back to check on the beleaguered Marine. When the hard-nosed sergeant finally reached Patterson, he wasted no time in unleashing a torrent of curses, shoving and prodding him forward like a drill sergeant in boot camp. Frustration coursing through him, Sergeant Greep rushed back to the patrol, his voice booming as he ordered Sergeant Larson to fall back. "Stay with Patterson until he gathers his strength," he commanded, urgency coloring every word. For those tense moments, Patterson was left alone, disoriented and grappling with the unsettling reality of his predicament, too overwhelmed to fully grasp the seriousness that loomed around him. As PFC Patterson lifted his weary eyes to the steep rocky terrain looming ahead, despair crashed over him like a relentless wave. The summit felt like an elusive dream, a cruel mirage teasing him from afar. Overwhelmed by fatigue, he crumpled, teetering dangerously close to the brink of heat exhaustion. In a sudden twist of fate, the mud beneath him betrayed his every step, transforming the trail into a chilling chute of terror. He plunged hundreds of yards into the dark embrace of the ravine, the haunting echoes of his struggle reverberating through the air, a casualty not merely of exhaustion, but of the merciless jungle that engulfed him without mercy. The fall was merciless, leaving Patterson battered and bruised, teetering on the edge of unconsciousness. Alone in the dense wilderness, he confronted the chilling reality. Either he would succumb to his injuries or become prey for the relentless jungle. Hours later, as the oppressive darkness of night crept in, Patterson's eyes fluttered open, heart pounding with the stark realization that he was utterly isolated in a world turned hostile. A desperate cry for help lingered on his lips, but he knew all too well that the NVA could be lurking behind every towering tree, every shadowy bush, every creeping shrub. When Sergeant Larson stepped onto the scene, an unsettling stillness enveloped him. Patterson was nowhere to be found. The jungle, with its thick foliage and creeping vines, seemed unnaturally hushed, as if it were concealing a dark secret. It had devoured Patterson whole, and was now methodically digesting its grim feast. Amid the tense silence of our patrol, Larson returned, his approach to Lieutenant Strange marked by a deep furrow etched across his brow. He delivered news that sent a shock wave through our ranks. PFC. Patterson was missing. Those words hung in the air like a storm cloud, an unsettling truth threatening to shatter the fragile cohesion of our platoon. Lieutenant Strange, ever the unwavering leader, sprang into action without hesitation. He mobilized a search and rescue team with a fierce resolve, driven by an unyielding commitment to bring his missing Marine safely back into our fold. With every passing hour, the anxiety gnawed at us. The absence of PFC Patterson hung heavy in the air, an unspoken reminder of the danger that surrounded us. Had he fallen victim to the very shadows we now feared? We exchanged worried glances, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on us like a leaden blanket. The jungle felt like a trap, and we were its prey, waiting for the inevitable strike that could come at any moment. As darkness descended upon the jungle, a palpable tension blanketed the platoon, thick enough to slice through. Whispers slithered through the air, igniting a spark of anxiety among us. PFC. Patterson was still missing. The search team returned, their faces etched with concern and disappointment, sending tremors of dread through our ranks. Fear wrapped its icy fingers around us as we pondered his fate, the jungle's dense canopy shrouding secrets that could mean life or death. In that agonizing moment of uncertainty, I shut my eyes, offering a silent prayer for our missing Marine, clinging to hope that he would find his way back to us, safe and sound. As the night unfurled, echoing with the vibrant symphony of the jungle, my thoughts lingered on Patterson, a bittersweet reminder of the unbreakable bond we shared, brothers forged in the fires of the Marine Corps.